What's up, folks? This is Justin Garcia, aka Master Chim, and welcome to the Pressure Project. Today on the Pressure Project podcast, I have a very good friend, the esteemed, renowned Tuhon Harley Elmore from Warriors Way down in Wichita Falls, Texas.
That's it.
Tuhon Harley, why don't you say hi to the Pressure Project listeners?
Pressure to power, guys.
All right. So we've been trying to make this happen for a while. I'm glad that we did. There's a lot of stuff to talk about without giving too much of your background away. You know, one of the things, and this is for you listeners, you know, Tuhon Harley is probably on my top 10 list of martial artists that I know. And it's a combination of his skill and ability, his background, the real sort of depth of understanding of a lot of concepts in the martial arts that I sort of hold as being very virtuous. There's a lot of guys. I know a lot of UFC fighters. I know a lot of, medal-winning, jiu-jitsu practitioners. But everybody has, I think, their definition or their sort of slant on what a martial artist is. And by my criteria, Tuhon Harley is definitely top 10. But I want to start the talk, Tuhon, talking about what your idea of martial arts is, because so much of what we're going to discuss is going to be sort of predicated on that definition and that sort of that lens that you look at this all through.
Sure, yeah. Having been in martial arts so many years, it's meant a lot. Martial arts has meant a lot of different things to me over the period of time. So, what it meant for me in my 20s is completely different than in 40s. So, but I think to start off with, martial arts was really a way for me, a kind of a salvation and maybe an escape for growing up in a small town in Arkansas with an abusive alcoholic father who, slapped my mom around and slapped me and my brother around. And so, I really kind of got into martial arts for self-defense, because I thought that as the oldest son, that was my job, was to defend my mom and stand up for her and that sort of stuff. And so, really at that point, it was very practical in its format. And also, being from a small town in Arkansas with a population of 1,000 people, it was a form of exploration of the world. There was no ethnicity variation in this small town in Arkansas. So, the idea that there were people out in the world who didn't look like me, didn't speak the same language as me, didn't believe in the same God, had completely different backgrounds. They were like Vulcans, So, I'm like, wow, that was so. For me, it was also a way to explore the world in a way that and have some small piece of it. So that's kind of what it meant for me in my early years, and then as I graduated, from high school, I ended up living on my own when I was 16. I ended up living on my own in a house in Arkansas with no electricity and so no refrigerator, no stove, no hot water, none of that stuff. And so for me then, it was really a way for me to have a goal, something to help me fight my way out of that poverty and fight my way through all that hardship, and something to concentrate on for as self-improvement and a good mentor. My martial arts instructor, Monty Ashley, was a fantastic mentor, so it was something that kept me focused and helped me fight my way out of that and endure that hardship. The discipline and the sacrifice and all that stuff that I was learning in martial arts, I was living through in real world. So I remember one time I was living in this house, and I had this lamp that I talked. There was one house at the end of this road besides mine, and it was my grandparents' house, and they had long moved into town, and so some renters lived there, and I talked the renter into letting me run a couple of extension cords to my house so I would have one outlet. And so I ran these couple extension cords, wrapped some plastic around it, and taped it so it wouldn't short out in the rain. And so during the day I had a radio, and at night I had this lamp. And I had this lamp, and it had this one little plastic base and a stick and the little bitty thing, the switch and the thing that screws the bulb into, and that's it. And I had it sitting on the table, and I was eating dinner, and dinner was my common dinner was a piece of white bread with some syrup poured on top of it. And that was pancakes. Right. And so I was eating these pancakes, and looking at that lamp, I was like, that is the bare minimum it takes to make a lamp. Like, if you take any of those things apart, it's no longer a lamp. You can add a whole bunch more stuff, but that's the bare minimum it takes to make a lamp. And I was looking at this plate, and I was like, this is the bare minimum it takes to make this is the bare minimum it takes to make a life. There has got to be a better way to do this. Right. And martial arts has given me the opportunity and the venue to find a way to do that, you know. So it gave me mentors, it gave me goals, it gave me a pathway to accomplish those things and fight my way out of that and overcome all that stuff. And so, you know, in my 20s, it went on to move to be fighting. You know, I wanted to spar and fight everybody I could get my hands on, and wanted to prove myself and prove my art and test things and explore. My first two instructors were, you probably remember, Professional Karate Association, PKA. They were reigning PKA world champions at the time I was training with them as a teenager.
Who was that?
Yeah, so, you know, they were kicking the crap out of me as a young teenager.
Who was the instructors? I want to actually, because you've trained with so many different people, like your amount of experience with other people, it's just it's mind-boggling, you know, the different worlds that you've touched on. So who were those instructors, and when you started?
Yeah, so, you know, I want to say it was probably 83. My timelines may be off a little bit, but throughout this, but that was a guy named Norris Mr. Cool Williams, and that was his fight name. And no kidding, rode around on a motorcycle and that sort of stuff. But he was the reigning PKA world champion, and he had some good boxing hands, and he had a spinning back kick that would just punch people right out through the ropes. You know, fold them up and push them right out of the ropes. And then I studied with a guy named Lafayette the Sting Lawson, and Lafayette had been a very, very talented, very skilled Taekwondo practitioner who knew Norris and turned PKA fighter, and became a champion pretty quickly. And I think Lafayette was champion for a long time. So in PKA. And of course, PKA died out eventually, you know, Muay Thai and that sort of stuff killed that particular sport. But that's where I grew up, with grown men punching me and knocking the breath out of me and knocking me out. And so that's where I started, you know. Right. But yeah. So
you went from there, and how did you do much competing? Like, what was the environment like when you started? So when I started, just to give you some reference, you know, it was, we train and everybody's training for the competition. All I wanted to do was fight. All I wanted to do was either MMA or, you know, like I grew up fighting in the streets. I grew up, you know, and this became an outlet to sort of help me deal with that relationship with violence that I had. But so many people that when I started, they would just get ready for the next tournament. Where was the tournament world in your training? How was that handled back then when you started?
Yeah, you know, so back then, in Arkansas, the only kind of competition you could get into was one or the other. You were either doing what I would say is more commonplace or traditional karate tournaments, and so or you were doing full contact kickboxing, which I was just barely old enough to do that. And so we were doing karate tournaments. You know, I would go and spar and, you know, do forms and all that stuff. And but you know, I remember very distinctly, we were sitting on the little stage in my high school, because Norris Williams taught at my high school, taught martial arts in my high school after hours. We're sitting on the little stage, and I've been training and prepping up for my first full contact fight. And he is at the time the reigning world champion. And I said, you're the champion. I mean, is this what you would want to do if you had to do it all over again? Are you happy with this lifestyle? Is this what you want? And he said, I've had my cheekbone crushed. I've almost lost my vision in my left eye. I've had this, I've had that, multiple marriages, multiple managers ripping me off. I'm broke. I can't keep a wife. I can't do this. And I'm all busted up and fighting and staying fit and all that stuff's hard on you. If I had to do it all over again, I would find a different way to make a living in the martial arts other than fighting. And I went, well, all right, cancel my fight.
Right.
And that was it. That was the end of any idea I had that I was going to go fight in the ring and be a champion or anything like that. Because here was the guy who had it all, and he was saying, man, it's a long, hard road, and if I had to do it all over again, I would find a different way. So I listened to that,
Yeah.
So I did karate tournaments for a while, but and then fighting really, I guess, tournament or Muay Thai and all that stuff didn't really come along until later on in my career, where I kind of felt like I had already established myself as a martial artist in a different avenue, and so where my friends were still doing some kickboxing and some Muay Thai matches, I was already kind of doing, like, I'd rather do full contact stick sparring and that kind of stuff. So I kind of thought that other stuff was kind of boring by then,
All right. So
excited about that.
Going from that more traditional background, when I met you, the world that I met you in is the, Sayoc / FMA world.
Yeah.
You weren't a kickboxer when I met you. I still don't see you as a kickboxer.
Right.
So at some point, you ventured into the world of weapons training and FMA. How did that happen?
Well, I was doing that stuff. I started studying under those guys. As good a fighters as they weren't very good teachers, and they were certainly not very good businessmen. So they didn't stay around for long. I trained with those guys for a couple of years, which was a great introduction for me. Lots of calisthenics, lots of hard sparring. Then I got into an art with a guy named Monty, actually, and he taught a Kempo system and a Chinese Kung Fu system. So it was much more street oriented. So kicking to the groin and kicking to the legs and throwing and locking and choking. So it was more diverse. And so I was really captivated by that. So I ended up getting my black belt under him, a couple of different black belts under him. And then he introduced me to Terry Gibson. We got to meet Terry Gibson at a seminar, and Terry Gibson was the only Inasano instructor in this part of the country. And so that struck my relationship with him, and I began taking private lessons with him, and that just kind of blossomed until about 1990. So it was a couple of years worth of private lessons that I was taking, and I was still dirt poor, still trying to figure things out. So I was in Arkansas, and I would save up enough money to go pay a couple hours worth of private lessons. So save up $100, and then I would travel 2.5 hours to Tulsa and take 2 hours worth of private lessons. And then he would let me attend the night classes where I could spar and train with the other guys in his class. And then I would go home and I would train the crap out of that information, get as many reps as I could for another month, and then I would come back again. So I did that for a couple of years. And then around 1990, he offered me a job as an instructor and program director at his academy. And that was my shot. That was my shot at the big show. So from there, I got a chance to have a consistent access to Dan Inasano and Master Chai and Herman Sawanda and all those guys, and train with them regularly, build a relationship with them, get certified by them, that sort of stuff. So that's kind of my kickoff.
So you've been training with the Inasanto organization at large since about 90?
Well, I first met Dan Inasano in 1988. And so the same year I met Terry Gibson and started taking private lessons. So I started, in the whole family, training the Guru Dan and the whole family in 1988. Yeah.
So almost 30 years.
Yeah.
It's incredible. That is incredible.
29 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So you now, you've grown into, and I don't want to talk about the school yet, but I want to get into when you met Pamana Tuhon.
Yeah.
How that happened. Obviously, I know you firstly through Sayoc, and we've trained together. You're obviously a Tuhon now in Sayoc, and we've been on STG contracts together. And Sayoc is, for me, just a tremendous sort of core identity in who I am. And you became, you found your own way to that same identity, that same group. How did that come about?
I was training with Guru Dan, and we were doing some blade work, and I was encouraging Guru Dan to teach more material, more blade work in his seminars, and because he has some really great blade work, and I was encouraging to teach more of that. And he said, look, if you want to train blade work, you really need to go train with a guy named Chris Sayoc. And I was like, who's that? And not being from the East Coast, and also not being old enough to have been around when Chris Sayoc was more public. I said, I want to train with him. He gave me his number. I called Pamana Tuhon directly and said, hey, I'm a student of Dan Inosanto's. He said, I should train with you. He said, okay, let me call you back. And he vetted me with Guru Inosanto, and then called me back and said, okay, I'm coming down for a seminar. But when I first talked to Guru about it, Guru Inosanto, I said, why should I study that system? He said, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, I think they're a 10. And I said, well, what would you rate our system? What would you rate the Inosanto system, our blend of arts? He said, on a scale of 1 to 10, probably a 7, maybe an 8. And I was like, that's impossible. No way. The best blade stuff in the world. I said, what makes them better than us? And he said, well, they're specialists. That's what they do. And so they're just better at things than we are. They have more material, more understanding, all that stuff. So I was like, well, if it's that good, I mean, when Guru Dan says something like that,
right,
you probably should pay attention. And so I said, okay, that's it. And so Pamana Tuhon was nice enough to open the door for me. And that was back before there was really any kind of organization. There was no instructor weekends. There were no, there was a Sama, but there was really, it was really kind of small. And so I would call and say, hey, can I come up and spend a week? And, have this time available? And he said, yeah, come on up. And so I would fly up there, and I would spend a week sleeping on his couch in the living room. And there was no kind of organization. I would get up in the morning. He would get me up in the morning. He would play In the Jungle. 7:30 in the morning, he would come down, walking down the stairs, and then he would play In the Jungle and wake everybody in the house up. And then we would get up and start training. And there'd be somebody. Sometimes there'd be no one there. And so I would train with Tuhon Jimmy, and people would show up, and they'd show up for 2 hours, and I would train on them. And then they would go back to work, and then 2 other guys would show up, and for 2 or 3 hours, I would train on them. And people just cycle in and out all week long. And I might see one guy for 2 hours, never see him again. I might see another guy for 2 hours a day. One guy Sean Gillen would show up for lunch every day at lunch, and we would slap each other around and stab each other, and then he would go back, and that would be all I would see him. And then Tuhon Tom would show up at 10 o'clock at night, and or 9 o'clock at night. We'd train till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then we'd go to bed, and we would do that for a whole week. And then eventually those became more organized. He would invite more people. When I was coming up, he would invite other people to show up. And so guys would start showing up. Next thing I know, there's 4 or 5 of us sleeping in the living room. And then eventually it became an actual structured thing, and people started showing up on a regular basis. But that was it. That was kind of the beginning of it,
It's incredible. So when you started with Sayoc, you met Pamana Tuhon. Aside from the obvious, just incredibly valuable recommendation of Dan Inosanto, what was it about Sayoc, or maybe Pamana Tuhon specifically, that sort of confirmed the expectations of them being as formidable and impressive as Guru Dan said they were?
Well, there's not really a lot of theoretical practice in Sayoc. So it was him cutting me and me not being able to stop that, So, he'd be like, okay, let's see your knife tapping. And I couldn't do anything. He treated me like I was a little kid. He, cut me, did anything he wanted, drew blades off my rig, juggled, cracked jokes, looked at his watch, threw blades over my head, caught them. I mean, just the whole seminar. I invited everybody that I knew at this seminar. And so he was humiliating me in front of everybody that I knew. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't do a thing to stop it. And then when it came time for me to feed him, it wasn't any better. It was actually worse. And so I was like, yeah, this guy's got the skill set. I mean, it's shocking how amazingly skilled he is. And, you get to a certain point in your career where you don't get schooled very often, Right. Maybe somebody's better than you would hear that, but to get just completely schooled like that was pretty shocking, especially in an area that I thought that I was pretty decent at. And but I wasn't too sure actually. My wife and I, we lived in the school at the time. We were laying in bed that night, and after our first seminar, and she's really bothered by them. She's bothered by the way Tuhon acts and the way Tuhon Jimmy acts, and they have just a different focus. But really, he was going through a lot of testing with us at the time. So he was trying to make us as uncomfortable as he could make us. He was just trying to evaluate, is it worth my time driving to Texas or
Right.
flying to Texas? And so it wasn't pleasant at all at the time. And, we were having to prove ourselves, who we were, that kind of thing. And so my wife's like, I don't like them. I don't want you to train with them. I'm like, I'm not sure I like them either, but that skill set is amazing. And I want to be able to do that to other people, and I never want anybody else to ever be able to do that to me again.
Right.
And so I was like, it'll be worth it if I can get that skill set. And I'm not normally like that. If I don't like you and I don't think you're the character that I want, it doesn't matter how good you are, I'm not going to train with you.
Same here. Very similar experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, Guru Dan can do that. He's an amazing human, but I cannot do that. If I think you're a jerk, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're a waste. So, but Tuhon, I didn't feel like about Tuhon, but he was intimidating, and he did have a different structure than anything I'd ever seen in martial arts, and but he had something. He had an understanding, not just a physical skill set, but he had an understanding of training and teaching and of his art and of people that I thought was unique. And there was something about him and the way he did things that I was like, man, that I want to be like that. I want that level of comprehension, that level of depth in understanding the arts and people and training and things that seemed obvious to him. I could just barely grasp the idea of what he was talking about. Right. So yeah, it was a great glimpse into what mastery really looks like. And I'm was incredibly honored to get to set it aside for so many years.
Right. All right. And then Roger that, I have a very similar experience in that, I was a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, had my school, fought professionally, was completely disgusted with the world of Jiu-Jitsu. And I happened to be at a business trip with Guru Nick Sakulis.
Yeah.
And I heard he had mentioned, not even to me in passing, that he was a Sayoc instructor. And I looked at him and I said, that's that knife stuff, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, you got to teach me, because I knew he was in Queens. And I had always known about his academy. But when you're in the Bronx, like Queens, it might as well be on the other side of the country. Right. Everybody pretty much sticks to their borough. And so I always knew of his school, but it wasn't until later on through business that I actually met him. And I told him, I said, listen, you're right over there in Queens. I got to learn that stuff. And, Guru Nick, he's polite, if nothing else. So,
yes,
he was like, all right, we got it. And I knew he didn't want to do it, but I was like, no, you took one step back. I'm on you now. So I kept on, and I was going there once a week with the white boy Pat, and we were taking privates. We were taking private lessons with him, and immediately, it was it's like, fuck, man, I'm not used to thinking like so much. And, you know, it was 3 and 9. Okay, right hand. Okay, now this is the left template for, and I'm like, wait a minute, I got to do these things at the same time. And I started realizing that there was some thought put into this, and there was shit that the system was tracking that I had never seen, even paid attention to, you know, in other martial arts. And especially in jiu-jitsu, you get a lot of guys, you know, you get some guys that are just brilliant grapplers. And, you know, their teaching formulas are just as impressive as their execution and whatnot. But by and large, a lot of the martial artists I've been exposed to have been physical specimen who have, you know, mastered a certain skill set and are just, you know, they're a bunch of hammers looking for nails, you know. And with Sayoc, I knew it was different. And one of the things that I used to constantly bother Guru Nick about was sparring, like free flow. I'm like, you got to spar with me. I got to see this in action. And he, no, we'll get to that. But in my mind, I'm like, listen, I can't be a part of anything that's full of shit. You know, I'm falling in love with this. You better not break my heart by finding out it's nonsense. And eventually, I basically guilted him into doing like a free flow tapping session with me. And I mean, if I was a fucking piece of fruit, you'd have a fruit salad at the end of it. Yeah. You know, it's like there is no way somebody who doesn't know the material finds success against somebody who does, you know. Yeah. And it was my entry into the world of Sayoc. I basically begged and pleaded with him to put the word in for me and Pat so we can go to Sama Sama. Right. And the first Sama Sama we went to was only like 2 months after we started training.
Wow. You know? Yeah.
And I was like, no, we're good. And he's like, listen, you know, you got to make – and I'm like, no, don't worry about it. I'm good. I know how to behave. I'm not going to embarrass you, you know. You know? And it was not too long after that I realized that what Sayoc had to offer was so far beyond how to fucking stick somebody with a knife, you know. And you know, I became, you know, the inside joke of, yeah, we're all knife fighters. You know, I started realizing why it was a joke. Right. Know, and why, you know, people reduce it to that. But it was just an incredible experience. Getting back to your story, where did your training sort of help? You know, you started off at a really rough spot, you know, telling me what had gone on with your father and your home life and, you know, eating the pancakes that weren't pancakes, by the way, you know, and, you know, you started training, you started becoming exposed to these different things. When did you actually start, in your estimation, pulling yourself out of that ditch and really starting to get a grip on, you know, seeing successes in your life?
Well, you know, working for Mr. Gibson, it was still, I mean, they were a small school. I think maybe we had 150 students, adult students. We didn't have any kids at all. It was 150 adult students, and it was all Muay Thai, JKD, Kali, you know, that C-lot, that stuff. And but there was no financial reward there. But for me, it was a complete immersion. Every weekend was a seminar. Every day was training with Terry as a training partner and these other instructors as a training partner. So for me, that was the physical accumulation of knowledge and experience and skill. But it wasn't really a great formula for how to run a business, you know, but it was my first glimpse. They were the first people that I ever met that ran successful martial arts school. Before then, I didn't know anybody who actually made a living as a martial artist.
Right.
So, you know, everybody I grew up with, everybody who knew me said, you're wasting your time, get a real job, get a real education, you know, quit being a bum, you know, all the stuff, you know, that people tell you when you're not following the path that they believe is the right path.
Right.
So, you know, and so Mr. Gibson passed away and just before I was 30. So all that was in my 20s, that formulative time there. I ended up moving down here and bouncing in a bar where I went from being what I would say a technician, you know, to actually fighting real gangbangers in the parking lot, against multiple opponents with weapons and all that stuff. So I got some real life scenarios, some real life experience with guys, jumping me and hitting me with beer bottles and trying to stab me and all that stuff. So I got some real world experience with a few hundred fights in just a few years. So, and then I opened my school here. And so I was coming off that technical understanding, off those real world experiences, right into my business, opening the Warriors Way. And then right after that, got into Sayoc.
Right.
And Sayoc is really, when I got into Sayoc, that's really when we started seeing things grow. And first few years, terrible. We made a ton of sacrifices. We couldn't afford rent in an apartment and rent at the school, so we moved into a little room in our school and lived in the office of our school. We had no kitchen. We shared the bathroom with the martial arts school. So we cooked on a hot plate in a microwave, and me and my wife and my Great Dane lived in a little bitty office. And we did that for a year and a half. When we first met Tuhon, that's where we were at. And so the school was growing, but everything we made, we put right back into the school. Right. We didn't have a mat on the floor. We had concrete floor. And so we couldn't grapple. We couldn't really do much of a lot of things. Even kickboxing, you're afraid somebody's going to slip and crack an elbow, much less doing throws in C-lot or grapple or any of that stuff. So we auctioned off my wife's Jeep. It was the only thing we owned that was any value, or that she owned. I didn't own anything. Only thing we had that was any value. So we auctioned off raffle tickets. All of our students auctioned off tickets, and sold raffle tickets for like $10 a piece. And we ended up making, I don't know, $13,000, something, much more than what the Jeep was worth. And we bought mats and matted the floor and had a little bit of money left over to repaint everything. So everything we made, we just reinvested. And it took a while. Our kids program finally began to take off. We started an after-school program that was a really good success because it gave us more hours. The problem with martial arts schools generally is that they can only make money from 5 o'clock on. So you have a 3 or 4 hour window where you can actually make money for the most part, unless you're doing like a fitness boot camp or something before hours. Right. So the after school program allowed us to have more time slots, more students, charge more money for that particular skill set. And so that's really when we started noticing the financial reward. We got the idea from Tuhon, and another buddy of mine out in San Diego was running a successful after school program. And it didn't take long after I got into Sayoc where everything I was going to do, I ran back Tuhon first.
Right.
I called him every week. I would call him. I would bring up my Windows dock on my computer, and I would dial the phone, and I hold on to it, and I would type notes about what we talked about. And because a lot of times he gave me something to do, but he also had amazing advice. So that's when we really started noticing success. So that was probably, we've been open for 18 years now, so I would say that's probably 12 years ago that we started seeing, some financial reward where we were beginning to build something that was replicable and consistent and reliable and that sort of stuff. That's
awesome. Yeah. So what is, I know, having been a school owner myself for a long while now, there are different obstacles and hurdles being a martial artist as opposed to being a martial arts business owner. And I don't mean the differences of, running a business compared to training for a fight, but as a business owner, you are now a patriarch of sorts, and other people's training starts to take priority in your worldview. Whereas, because I remember when I was training and competing, even after I opened a school, there'd be times where I'd be getting ready for a fight, and somebody would walk in, inquiring about classes, and I would turn and look at them and say, "Can't you see I'm fucking training? Like, come back when I'm not busy." Like, I would be offended that these people wanted to disrupt my training by giving me money and joining my business, But, it was something obviously I had to square away. I was certainly greatly motivated by the time, my wife became pregnant for the first time. And I was panicking that I was going to have this other child that I had to feed,
Right.
there's like the visual of me getting food and putting it in the baby's mouth, like, was on my mind 24 hours a day.
Where am
And
I going to come up with that?
yeah, and it definitely changed the way that I looked at martial arts, and I think for the better, because I started developing the teaching formulas. I started developing other things, in that persona or that archetype. What
Right.
were some of the differences that you saw?
Yeah, I agree. When I first moved to Wichita Falls, I was going to recreate Gibson's martial arts, right? I was going to recreate the school that I had up there. I was going to have 150 adult students. That was going to make us a living. We were going to train some Muay Thai fighters. We're going to do this, do that. And the city of Wichita Falls was not interested in that at all.
Right.
So I was a little disappointed that there wasn't a market for that. So, but you know what there was a market for? There was a market for a kids program. And I was like, screw that. I am not a babysitter. I have seen those kind of guys. I am not that guy. I'm a real martial artist. And my wife, who had never been in martial arts at all, who didn't have any of the biases that I did, she was like, well, you can teach them whatever you want. You can make them whatever you want, but their parents want their kids to be in the program. And I had parents that were saying, look, I personally have 5 kids. I want to be in your program, teach them JKD. And I was like, that's not possible. So, but I said, okay, I'll try it. And because we were turning down students, right?
Right.
So I started a kids program, and I thought the whole time, I'm like, this is not what I want to do. And then, over the years, I realized, man, these guys are eager. They're willing to do whatever you want them to do. You can make this little kid, do push-ups all day long, and he'll take punches to the face. They'll do everything that you ask them to do if you give them the right motivation and all that stuff. And you can produce, in the long run, an amazing result, right? You can turn kids' lives around. You can provide those things that martial arts gave me. I can now give that to those kids. And I can end up with a result that is phenomenal. And so I had to shift my gears from that, because I thought that, well, if you're a commercial martial arts school and you have a bunch of kids in your kids program, you've sold out. And I had to create my own reality there and say, no, that's not the case. You can have a bunch of kids in your kids program, but you have to hold them to the standards that you set for them, and you have to make them strive for that, and kids will rise to that occasion. Parents, at least the parents where I'm at here in the great state of Texas, still believe in hardship for their children, right? And that you are making my kid better by punching him in the face and by not passing him on his test if he's not ready, and those sort of things. So the community met those ideals, matched my ideals. They were willing to get along with that, and the kids rose to those occasions. So that was all internal. I had to create that myself, overcome those biases. And,
Right.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of students who have empowered me in a good way. I've had students who have, I like to say, empowered me in a not so good way.
Right.
You end up stronger either way, but the process is different. Give me an example, and an anecdote, if necessary, of a student who just was the most trying, just took the most energy out of you, and either ended poorly or ended well. But give me a hard case example.
Yeah. Well, when I first got into Sayoc, I had instructors under me already. And when I started Sayoc and started doing the things in Sayoc, I started holding them to the same standards of performance and expectation that the Sayocs were holding me to. And those guys were unwilling to follow that path.
Mm.
One even was arrogant enough to say, look, we're already instructors. We don't need to serve anyone else. We're going to do our own path. And I was like, man, what is wrong with you? I mean, I'm only 30 years old. I am too young to be on my own. I still need mentors. I still need people who are going to guide me. How can you be even younger than that and think you have it all? And so I lost every full instructor that I had when I started Sayoc. Every one of my instructors drifted away, and some very negatively and some not so negatively. But they all drifted away. And so I lost practically, I think I kept one instructor, one full instructor, and the rest all went on their own way. And that one no longer does Sayoc. So that was a big thing, big hurdle, to overcome when you're watching your organization, the instructor base of your organization fall apart. And I didn't have the skill yet. I didn't have the leadership experience yet that I later gained through Sayoc to keep that together and put that together. So that was pretty rough. But and then in my kids' programs, man, I've had kids have so many things that you'll get a kid in there who was born addicted to a drug because his mother was taking drugs when he was when they were pregnant with him, or a kid will come in and have all these disorders. And I had this one kid, and he had an unspecified disorder, but he would not shut up. He would talk about all sorts of inappropriate things in class, and everybody else is good. And once you develop a structure in your class, pretty much everybody falls in line with that. They say, okay, this is how everybody else is behaving. That's going to how I behave. And they learn from just being in the group. But this kid never got that. And every day I thought to myself, I'm going to strangle this kid. And I'm going to strangle his mom, and I'm going to strangle him. That's just, they were taxing. But eventually I reached the point where I'm like, I don't know what else to do. I literally cannot tell that kid to stop talking and stop talking about inappropriate things in my class one more time. And he stood right in front of me, and he's talking about it, and I was like, I don't know what else to do. I said, come here. And I gave him a big hug. And he stepped back, and I could see there's something that affected him a little bit. And so we went back to training, and I said, okay, that's it. Because if it's not that, I'm going to smash him. I'm at my wit's end. And so I'm going to hug him instead of squeezing him to death. Right. And every time he did something wrong, I would give him a hug and be like, hey, let's start again. And that completely changed the course of that kid's career and martial arts. And probably 2 years later, he'd already been in the martial arts program for years. Probably 2 years later, he got his junior black belt in our program, which is tough. It's a tough thing. It's the toughest thing these kids will ever do or have ever done in their life at this point. Now, they'll go on and do other amazing things, but at this point, hardest thing they've ever done. And this kid accomplished it. And when I gave him his black belt, I was like, I got a little choked up, because I'm like, man, there were so many times when I didn't think you were going to make it. Well, we weren't going to make it. This relationship wasn't going to survive. And but I had to change and adapt to what that kid needed for his particular life. So and so now he's gone on and has become successful and become something good. But man, every day I thought, I'm going to go tell his mom this kid's not right for our program.
Yeah, that's two incredible examples. On the adult example that you had mentioned with the instructors, very similar. I've had very similar experiences. One of the phrases that I use, or the analogies I use for my guys, is I don't care how many people leave. The environment in my academy is always going to conduct itself almost like a self-cleaning oven.
Yeah.
It's to be expected that every once in a while you cook enough things, you're going to have to clean the oven. And you want to have an environment that takes care of it, for you. The integrity is always there. The good intentions is always there. The consistency of mission is always there. But you're going to have people who just, their missions don't, become congruent with everybody else's. And those people, it's always better when you see it earlier than later.
Right.
But when you know the formulas of this happening and you could see them, then it winds up making everybody better. As soon as you get the people that shouldn't be there out of there, everything else becomes enriched. In my experience, your kids' example, another great example of a teaching methodology. It's not a matter of, like, when I talk about teaching, especially because I homeschool my kids, and I'm always talking to either budding homeschool parents or martial arts instructors who are trying to balance, all the different plates that you have to balance as a school owner. I'm always saying, listen, when you're teaching, it's not a matter of saying it the right way. It's a matter of them hearing it the right way.
Right.
Results is the only thing that matters.
That's it.
And, the hug isn't going to work on everybody, but it'll work on him, and committing yourself to being his instructor is committing yourself to a process.
Right.
It's not just promising him a script that's already pre-prepared,
Right. Right.
So that is a great, great story.
Yeah. He's the only kid that I've ever had that was the thing, that was what he needed. That was the formula, and, I tell my staff all the time, I'm like, hey, you never know what this kid's going through in his home life. You never know. You may be the only person in this kid's life that today says something positive to him. He's failing at school, so his teachers are down on him. He's hanging out with a rough crowd at school, so nobody thinks he's really worth a crap. His home life is for crap. He doesn't know his dad. His mom's overworked or on drugs. And today you're going to be the only person that says, hey, I'm glad to see you. And pats him on the back and tells him he's worth a crap and that he's doing a good job, right? And that he can make it. And so when people realize that that every day you may be that guy for every kid, it changes your approach, how you need to treat children and how you need to treat people. People are the same way, right?
Right.
So we're real big on that. And then from there, we have to tailor it towards individuals. So some get that a lot, and so they need a more stern coach. They need the guy that says, you're not good enough, you need to be, that's not fast enough, work harder, that sort of stuff. And other guys might need that hug,
Right.
Which was way outside my teaching formula.
Right. In application it was, not in theory though, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, switching gears somewhat. What 2 books would you recommend to a brother?
That's a good question. I don't read much anymore. I used to read a lot, and I think that's an important thing in people's development, is that they read, and they get a different perspective of the world and things like that. It also helps if you and I have read the same book. I can say something and you're like, oh yeah, and so you're on the same page. But I don't recommend much books anymore. There's a book called Phantom Warrior that's about a private in World War II, and his position is overrun, and he ends up, shooting with his machine gun until that's out, going to another machine gun until that's out, shooting with a rifle until that's out, picking up his dead brother's rifles, shooting until they're empty. Japanese are jumping into the foxholes. He's beating them to death with the stock of the rifle and stabbing them with bayonets and getting stabbed and getting shot and beating them to death with his bare knuckles until finally he single-handedly turns back that invasion. And when guys show back up, there's hundreds of dead Japanese soldiers on one side and a bloody knuckled, sweaty, bleeding soldier on our side. And so I like that because, it just goes to show you that in the real world, what having the right focus, the right determination, and of course some skill and luck. But and that guy, that whole generation, when people celebrate those kind of warriors, that guy was not a warrior beforehand. He was just a good old boy from rural America who got put in that situation and had the right character to be able to pull that off. And a ton of people are like that. They have no idea what they can be until they get in the situation. And so I think that's a great book, Phantom Warrior. And then there's another book. Like you, I'm a big fan of hardship.
Right.
Right. I do not believe that people are worth a crap unless they've been through some.
Right.
And so me, you, Tom Kyer, we all like, oh yeah, that guy's never had anything hard happen to him in his life. Soft hands, soft soul, you know. And so I'm a big fan of hardship. There's another book called Adrift. It's actually several years old now. It's about a guy who was doing some racing on a sailboat that he built, and he got a whale capsizes his ship, and he spends the longest recorded time ever alone adrift in the ocean. And it's his story that he writes afterwards, and his journal of how he did it, what his mental process was, what kind of discipline it took, the actual physical effort it took to stay alive, floating in this little plastic or rubber boat that gets all these different things happen, and you know how to stay alive, how he's providing water for himself, problem solving. Like, if I don't fix this, I'll be dead tomorrow.
Right.
You know, if I don't fix this, I won't survive until the sun comes back up. I have to solve this problem right now, no matter how tired I am, no matter how foggy my thinking is, because I haven't had water and food and all that stuff, and the discipline it took for him to be able to do that and to overcome those things. I'm a big fan. So
That's awesome. That sounds awesome, both of them. So it's Phantom Warrior and Adrift.
Adrift, yeah.
Awesome. All right, so as we wind down, I want people to be able to find your information, seek out and do what you do. One of the things that we didn't really discuss, but I would kick myself if we don't, is you are also the Harley Elmore of Headhunter Blades. And a lot of very, very special people carry a lot of special hardware that you made for them.
Yes, yeah.
Tell me quickly, and I don't mean quickly like hurry the fuck up. I mean quickly like as in I don't want to, I don't want to waste your time on the topic, but you started making blades and you've grown into one of the most successful blade makers, certainly in this country, if not the planet, considering who carries your blades. How did that come about?
Well, I was fortunate enough to be there at the inception of Sayoc Tactical Group and be on the first job, first contract we ever did, and then to be able to work for, the last, 14, 15 years with Tom Kyer and STG, and to take full-time jobs and to do that kind of stuff for a living. So that gave me opportunities to speak to a different crowd. And honestly, we were buying knives because, we're the knife guy, right? So people say, well, what should I carry? And we didn't really have a real recommendation. We were like, well, you can get this, but you gotta modify the sheath and you gotta fix the handle. And so they were like, well, can you do that for us? We're like, sure. So we were buying other people's blades and then fixing the handles and
fixing them,
custom sheath. Yeah, fixing them. And and that was painstaking in and of itself and took a lot of time. And so, after a while, I'm like, man, we should just make our own knives because we're fixing so much, spending so much time that we could have made our own knife by then. And so that's exactly what we started doing. And so I went and found a local knife maker here in Wichita Falls who's turned out to be a legend in the knife making community. His name's Fred Carter. And he makes art knives. So he makes exquisite works of art that are beautifully engraved and sell for one knife sells for thousands of dollars, and phenomenal. And so he gave me, I had made knives my whole life in my grandpa's shop, right? So, but I didn't really make knives like Fred Carter. I didn't really have a real process. And so he gave me the basics of, and I say the basics because he considers what I make as a knife is barely a knife.
Right.
It has a handle, an edge, and a point. But him being a lifetime custom knife maker, he makes more nice stuff.
Right.
Mine's not really particularly what I would consider particularly nice. It's a tool. And so I started making knives based on what the needs of the people that we were dealing with in Sayoc and in Warriors Way and in Sayoc Tactical Group, making knives that were designed specifically for their purpose. And so that's what motivated the designs. That's what motivated the carry features and all that stuff. So, and it's been pretty successful. I'm honored that they carry my blades, and eventually that grew to the point where we started having blades made by a production company overseas, and so now we have that production line going, as well as still providing some custom pieces for unique opportunities and unique people, and so yeah, it's pretty awesome.
That's awesome. As somebody I've run a Headhunter blade for a few years now, I definitely recommend them to everybody, and a lot of my guys I see, come to me over the years, and they've been, hey, MC, check it out. And it's, they're running a rat, or they got it dirty, or, whatever the case is. So really, really cool. And, and it's also a testament to, I think, your identity as what a martial artist is. I recall Tuhon Tom saying when he first met Pomona Tuhon told him, a warrior or a martial artist is somebody who always has an answer for whatever question is asked. Somebody who can be relied on, to get the job done, whatever that happens to be. And yourself, a successful practitioner, school owner, instructor, and now a blade maker, it only doesn't make sense to somebody who doesn't understand the way these things work. But when somebody understands, the formulas of being a feeder, of what having, the proper powerful LOT, can be, and give you, it all makes sense,
Right.
It all makes sense. And good things happen to good people that do good things and are surrounded by good groups,
Right.
And your life is certainly a testament to that.
Thank you.
So, I'm assuming people are probably not going to listen to this and be within a quick commute to Wichita Falls, Texas. But where could they find? Because I think the Headhunter blades is something that everybody should seek out and look to become a part of as a purchaser of your work. Where could they find it? And where could they find some of your other material? Because I think you have a YouTube channel now, and you're doing things that are letting some of your stuff available, making it available to the public. Where can they find it?
Yeah, HarleyElmore.com. We're that has access to Headhunter blades material. We actually have a new website that we hope to have out in the next couple of weeks. It'll be up, and so it'll actually have a Harley Elmore site where if you want to train with me, seminars, private lessons, that sort of stuff, that'll teach you how to do that. We'll also have an online training program for people who want to get into the program and see what we're doing. It has a program for Warriors Way, so you can go see what we're doing at our academy, events we're hosting here, and then Headhunter blades as well. So how to get into a blade and run a rat for yourself and that sort of stuff. So yeah, and then of course you can check us out, Harley Elmore, on Facebook, Harley and Crystal Elmore. It's Harley and the letter N, Crystal Elmore, and we're not separated because we're not really separated in real life. So half the time it's not me on Facebook talking; it's her answering questions for people because, like you, I'm busy doing it, and
Right.
so. A lot of times people are like, man, you haven't returned my email. I'm like, man, I am busy doing stuff. I'm doing the stuff that you want me to do. So you be patient, and I'll get to you, or my wife will get to you. Somebody will answer your question. We'll get you taken care of, I promise. But, sometimes the social media stuff gets pushed a little bit back because, I guess I'm on contract. I'm training somebody for a week or somebody.
Because of life is actually happening.
I'm busy with my nose to the grindstone, getting stuff done. So
right. And I would say in this society, there's too many people whose lives are the opposite of that. I'm so popular amongst people who have never actually seen me. You know?
Right.
So,
but, you know, I see that on Facebook. People want to, when they finally do something, they're posting about it. And I'm like, man, I don't have time to post about all the things we're doing because we're busy getting them done.
Right. Busy doing them.
Yeah, I'm actually busy doing them. And so I'm trying to get better at that. I'm learning the ropes about how to take, 3 minutes out to throw a photo up on Facebook and stuff. And so I'm still sporadic about it, but we're about to be a lot more accessible on those sites and have a lot more video content and all that stuff. So we got awesome. 2 new blades coming out for Headhunter blades. They'll be custom only blades. They won't have production line, be custom only. And I think people are going to like those things. So
that's awesome. Roger that.
Yeah.
Well, great talk, as I knew it would be, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time out to have this talk. I look forward to having you on again in the future. There are certainly things I'd love your take on. And final words to the listeners of the Pressure Project.
Oh, first, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. I've seen who you've had on, and I'm honored to be on that list. And thanks for all the great work you've done. To all the people out there who are listening, man, I would say stay on the path. A lot of times, I wasn't the most talented. I wasn't the hardest working. I wasn't the most physically gifted. I was just the guy who didn't give up. And that paid off, not just in martial arts, but in the rest of my life. So stay in there, endure those hardships, learn from them, and you can have anything that you want in life.
Yeah, and it's the only way you're going to be worth a shit in our eyes.
The only way. You got to endure some hardship, man.
All right, awesome. All right, brother, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go, and I will reach out to you, let you know when this is live.
Awesome, man. Sounds great. Thanks a lot.
All right, brother, man. Have a good one.
Take care, brother.